Well, let's start with the expert because, Mr. Expert, Professor Hassan, this is very clear for me. It's not a complicated conversation at all. There are two things about Donald Trump we all should be very, very firmly astute to. One, he's a liar. And two, he will steal the elections this November. He's setting this in motion as we speak. I don't know how people, kind of look at this, but everything Donald Trump does, he tells you ahead of time he's going to do. So if we know that, there are going to be ICE agents at polling places, we know he's going to target the 15 states or the 15 jurisdictions that are predominantly democratically controlled, small capital D Democrats. And we know that he's already bantied about the idea of the Insurrection Act. What should we be doing as citizens right now to get ourselves ready for what will not just be a long, hot summer, but a very difficult fall when it comes to elections in this country?
Well, I think that there's certainly an argument to be made that we've got to be vigilant. We have to be on guard now. And I think when we try to game out what it is that Trump might try to do, I'm much more worried about the back end of the election than the front end. I don't think we're going to see ICE agents swarming polling places. I think you'd get massive public resistance. I'm much more worried about when ballots are being tabulated. Mm-hmm. We saw last week that Trump's FBI, in an unprecedented move, went to Fulton County, Georgia, and seized actual ballots that were used in the 2020 election, supposedly for some kind of criminal investigation. Maybe that's just to please Donald Trump's fantasies about having won Georgia in 2020, but I worry it's kind of a test run for what he can get away with in 2026. If we have a very close congressional race, is he going to say that there's a problem in how the election was run and try and go in and have federal agents seize ballots? So we've got to prepare for that right now.
And we're watching his way of talking about this evolve in real time. I want you to take a listen to some sound. The President of the United States talking about the necessity of nationalizing elections and then whether or not he actually said that.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
You've recently suggested nationalizing elections. What do you mean by that?
And I didn't say national. I said there are some areas in our country that are extremely corrupt. They have very corrupt elections. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at Philadelphia. Take a look at Atlanta. There are some areas that are unbelievably corrupt. I could give you plenty of more, too.
Interesting, Eddie Glaude, that those are the cities he picks, cities with a large black population, cities that are democratically led. We often say this is in America. I think part of what we're being forced to reckon with in this moment is that there have always been efforts to prevent people of color, marginalized people from heading to the polls. We still have never seen anything quite like this.
Right. So I take Professor Hanson's words, I take his point to be quite right. That is, we need to worry about what's happening on the back end. But we also need to understand the way he's setting this up. Yep. Right. He's delegitimizing the process. He's undermining trust such that he can then intervene in the ways that we know he's going to intervene. We're soaked in lies. We're drowning in disinformation. We're drowning in real time. You can juxtapose what he says, and then he'll deny it immediately. And then it's joined with the history of the country, right? Detroit, Atlanta, Philly, massive corruption, right? Because at the same time that he's talking delegitimizing, he's also engaging in, right, setting the stage for purging voter rolls, undermining the ability of people of color to vote. So I think we need to see this as a 5-alarm fire and not just simply try to deal with Donald Trump's inconsistencies. The man lies like he breathes. Mm-hmm. So we need to understand what is really at stake here.
There's a lot at stake. To be very clear, I think it is maybe... I think it's absolutely ridiculous that the White House press secretary stood up at the podium today at the White House and kind of laughed off ICE at the polls as though it's not a big deal. It is a really big deal. It's actually illegal in this country for armed federal agents to be outside polling places. That is the law. It is illegal. Yet Steve Bannon is saying there's going to be ICE at the polls. Frankly, Rick, I believe that the president is going to use the Department of Homeland Security. And I say this based upon what we've seen over the last couple of months. And I think he's going to use the Department of Homeland Security as the vehicle through which to carry out these fantasies that he had in 2020 of seizing the ballots after the elections or even before. And he could use ICE to do that. He could use Customs and Border Patrol, or he could use HSI. I give you this from Reuters yesterday. Puerto Rico voting machines. It's Tulsi Gabbard's office that said the taking of voting machines and data was standard practice in forensic analysts, noting similar voting infrastructure elsewhere in the United States. I bring this up to note, Rick, the people that seized those voting machines were officials from HSI, which is the Department of Homeland Security's investigative body. It is the second largest investigative body in this country, second only to the FBI. They are telling us very loudly and clearly and telegraphing what the playbook is.
Well, I'd say, first of all, even if ICE agents are not in the streets, just talking about this, just us having these conversations has a demobilizing and demoralizing effect. And Democrats don't know what to do, because if they amplify this, they're just going to make people be more afraid or reluctant to go to the polls. But we have to start thinking now about whether or not states and localities or election law attorneys can go in and get injunctions to keep federal troops away. You're right, there are federal laws that say that you can't have this kind of federal interference. But, you know, when things happen quickly, you have to be prepared. And so I think the message should not be fear. The message should be there's a way to fight back and to protect our democracy.
You know, Eddie, the thing for me here, and I agree, I see where Rick's going here, and I do appreciate that piece of it. But so I want to flip the script a little bit on this and say, I think the focus between now and November should be on Republicans whose names are on the ballot. Because I'm very curious, my fellow Republicans. Do you subscribe to the idea of ICE agents being at polling places? Do you subscribe to the idea that you, as a Republican official, should take control of elections in another state? A state that you're not on the ballot in? A state you're not running in? That the federal government, now could you imagine Barack Obama, Mr. Republican Senator or Republican Congressman, or Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, in the 2024 election decided, you know what? I think we're going to look at all the red states and we're going to make sure that we take control of the ballots in those red states. Could you imagine, Mr. Republican Senator or Congressman, what your response would be? Share that with us, because that's the response you should be having right now. And I think the more, Eddie, we put that pressure out there to make Republicans, because the president is acting in their name. He's the titular head of our party. And the head of our party says, we're going to federalize and nationalize elections, even though he then comes back and goes, I didn't say national. No, you didn't say national. You just said take control of. What's the difference?
Mm-hmm. You know, Mike, I hear you. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, in a reasonable world, that seems like that would work.
Okay.
But it also seems to suggest a faith that you have yet to put aside. Right? That is to say, your eyes have repeatedly seen these Republicans behave in a way that they don't care about the hypocrisy. They don't care about the contradiction. They're either fearful or they're just simply committed to holding on to power by any means necessary. And so I'm sitting here not as an expert about elections. I'm sitting here trying to think about the moral rot that has put us in this place where the president of the United States can lie repeatedly to us, can say that he's going to basically try to take over our elections, right? And Republicans will sit back and nod and bend the knee and do whatever we want to do. And we are kind of barreling our way to the midterms, trying to figure out what we're going to do in the face of what we already see and what we see every single day. So I'm not so sure, Mike, revealing the hypocrisy will actually get us out from under all of this BS that we're drowning in.
Look, Hassan, I don't know if you've followed this, but the administration can't seem to get their story together about why Tulsi Gabbard was in Fulton County overseeing the FBI raid. They can't decide who sent her, what the rationale was. Talk to me, projecting into the future, about the role that she would be poised to play if everything that you have laid out as a hypothetical were to come to pass.
Well, I think there's an optimistic story and a pessimistic story about Tulsi Gabbard being involved. The optimistic story is they don't have anything for her to do. They don't trust her. She's not on board when they're going into Venezuela or going into bomb Iran or something like that. So they give her voting fraud as one of the things she should investigate, and they'll keep her busy, and she can line up with the conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has put out there. And the reason they were in Puerto Rico is because there's some conspiracy theory about a Venezuelan connection to the voting machines. That's not going to go anywhere. The pessimistic story is much worse. It's that not only is it going to be DHS and ICE and the FBI, but it's going to be the entire intelligence apparatus that's going to be used to try to put doubt on the integrity of the election by claiming potentially foreign interference in the election, by just making things up that can be a pretext for potentially trying to do the things we were talking about earlier in terms of interfering with the counting of the ballots.
Alicia, I know it sounds really bleak, so I think I want to give people a moment of hope, and it's that Democrats in this country do seem to be prepared and strategizing. Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, put out a video yesterday, and I do think the Democratic Governors Association, given the conversations I've had, are planning for this. So, a little hope.